I've always loved traveling alone. It felt like freedom. No obligations, no schedules, no one to please but myself. So, when I decided to take a trip down the West Coast, it felt like a fresh start. I was trying to get away from the routine of life, shake off the suffocating weight of home, and rediscover myself. My parents didn't understand it, of course. They never did. But they trusted me enough to let me go on the condition that I check in with them every day. And I did, until I didn't. The last hotel I checked into was the Hargrave. I found it online. It was cheap and in downtown Los Angeles. The reviews weren't great, but the place had history, and that fascinated me. They called it notorious, an odd mix of thrill and danger that was hard to resist. I'd heard about its connection to some infamous crimes, but that didn't scare me. Not really. I figured it would just be another quirky story to add to my travel journal. I remember checking in, the smell of the place. It was old, musty, like 1,000 lives had passed through those walls and left pieces of themselves behind. The lobby was dimly lit, with flickering lights that reminded me of dying fireflies. The front desk clerk was this tired-looking guy with bags under his eyes. He barely glanced up at me when he handed me the key. The first night was uneventful, mostly. I spent the evening wandering around the streets, exploring the nearby shops, getting a feel for the area. I was trying to shake off the restless energy that had been building up inside me, but something felt off. Even then, I couldn't quite place it. Maybe it was the way the shadows seemed darker than usual, or how the city's noise felt more distant, muffled, like I was in some kind of bubble. I brushed it off, convincing myself it was just the exhaustion from traveling. The second night, though, that was when things began to get strange. I'd come back to my room after another day of wandering, feeling more drained than usual. My head ached, my skin felt dry and tight, and I was unusually thirsty. I remember taking a shower, and it was terrible. The water sputtered out in bursts of black at first, like oil, before turning clear. The pressure was weak, barely more than a trickle. I thought it was strange, but didn't think too much of it. Cheap hotels often had bad plumbing, right? But it wasn't just the water. There was something else. I could have sworn I heard sounds, like faint tapping or knocking, coming from the walls or maybe the pipes. It was soft, barely noticeable, but persistent. Tap, tap, tap. I paused, listening intently. Maybe it was just the building settling, or rats. I laughed at myself for even thinking it might be anything else. I tried to ignore it, but once you hear something like that, it's hard to unhear it. It starts to crawl under your skin, twisting its way into your thoughts until you can't shake it. I didn't sleep much that night. I kept tossing and turning, every small sound jolting me awake. The third day is when the water really started to bother me. I woke up with this horrible taste in my mouth. Metallic, almost sweet, but in the worst possible way, like copper and decay. I thought maybe it was something I ate the night before, but then I took a sip from the tap, and the taste hit me full force. It was like drinking liquid death. I spat it out immediately, gagging, and stared down at the sink. The water looked normal enough, but there was something off about it. It had a weird smell, too, faint but there, like something rotting deep beneath the surface. My stomach churned, and I felt sick. I called the front desk to complain. The same clerk answered, sounding just as disinterested as before. He mumbled something about the pipes being old and that they were working on it. He didn't offer any solutions, though, so I was stuck drinking bottled water for the rest of the day. That evening, I felt the need to get out of the hotel. The walls felt too close, suffocating. I took a walk, trying to clear my head, but even the city felt strange, detached. The streets were emptier than usual, and the few people I passed seemed distant, almost ghostly. There was a heaviness in the air, like a storm was brewing, but the sky was clear. I remember standing outside the hotel that night, staring up at it. The windows were dark, empty. I had this sudden, irrational thought. What if something's watching me from up there? I shook it off and headed back inside. When I got back to my room, I noticed something odd. The air felt different, colder maybe. There was a dampness to it that clung to my skin. And then there was that smell again. Faint, but unmistakable. I tried to ignore it and went to bed, but sleep didn't come easily. The sounds from the walls were louder now, more insistent. And there was something else. A whisper, maybe, or the faintest hint of a voice, but so distorted I couldn't make out the words. I told myself it was just my imagination, but deep down, I knew something wasn't right. The nightmares started that night. They were vivid, too vivid. I dreamt of water, dark and murky, filling my lungs. I was drowning, sinking deeper and deeper, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't break free. I could feel something in the water with me, cold hands brushing against my skin, pulling me down. I woke up gasping for air, my heart racing. I was drenched in sweat, and for a moment, I wasn't sure if I was still dreaming. I remember sitting up in bed, trying to calm myself down. The room was quiet now, the strange sounds gone, but the air was still thick with that damp, rotting smell. I turned on the light, trying to shake off the lingering sense of dread. That's when I noticed it. The floor was wet. Not soaked, but there were patches of dampness, like someone had walked through with dripping feet. I stared at it for a long time, my mind racing. Maybe I spilled something, I told myself. Maybe it was just condensation. But deep down, I knew that wasn't it. I knew something was wrong. I couldn't stay in the room any longer. I grabbed my things and went down to the lobby. The clerk was still there, though he looked different now, paler, almost sickly. He barely acknowledged me as I asked for another room, just handed me a key without a word. The new room was slightly better. No strange smells, no weird sounds, at least at first. But the nightmares continued. Every time I closed my eyes, I was back in that dark water, sinking, drowning, and there was always something there with me, something cold and lifeless, watching me, waiting. By the 5th day, I couldn't take it anymore. I was exhausted, paranoid, and felt like I was losing my mind. I was supposed to check out the next morning, but I decided to leave that night. I packed my bags and went down to the lobby to check out, but the clerk was gone. There was no one there, just an eerie silence that made my skin crawl. As I stood there, waiting for someone to appear, I heard it again, the tapping. But this time, it was coming from above me, from the ceiling. I looked up and felt my stomach drop. There, in the corner of the ceiling, was a small, dark stain. It was wet, slowly spreading out, dripping onto the floor. I watched in horror as the stain grew, the water seeping through the cracks, pooling around my feet. I don't know what possessed me to do it, but I followed the trail of water. It led me to a stairwell, one that I hadn't noticed before. It was dark, the kind of dark that swallows you whole, but something pulled me toward it. I climbed the stairs, my heart pounding in my chest, the air growing colder with each step. The smell of decay was overwhelming now, thick and suffocating. At the top of the stairs, I found a door, rusted, old. I hesitated for a moment, every instinct telling me to turn back. But I pushed forward, my hand trembling as I opened the door. The roof. I was on the roof. The cold night air hit me like a slap, but it did nothing to clear my head. There, in the center of the roof, were 4 large water tanks. They loomed over me, silent and menacing. And then I saw it. The hatch to one of the tanks was open, just slightly. My breath caught in my throat. I didn't want to go closer, but my feet moved on their own, dragging me toward the tank. The smell was unbearable now, thick and rancid. I climbed the ladder, my hands shaking, and peered inside. There she was, a body, bloated, pale, floating just beneath the surface. Her eyes were open, staring up at me, lifeless and empty. I stumbled back, falling to the ground, my heart racing so fast I thought it might explode. I don't know how long I sat there staring up at the tank in shock. The water I'd been drinking, The water that had tasted so foul. It had come from there. I ran. I don't even remember how I made it back to my room, how I grabbed my things and got out of that cursed place. The next thing I knew, I was on a bus, heading as far away from that hotel as I could get. I didn't tell anyone what I saw. Who would believe me? The police found her body a few days later. Mara Hill. Her death was ruled accidental, a tragic mishap. But I know better. I know what I saw, what I felt. Something in that hotel had pulled her in, something dark and ancient, hiding beneath the surface, waiting. And it almost had me too. But I got away. Or at least, that's what I keep telling myself. Because sometimes, late at night, when I'm lying in bed, I still hear it, the tap, tap, tap of water dripping from the ceiling. While the details may sound like fiction, they're based on actual events that happened in 2013. Elisa Lam, a 21-year-old traveler, was last seen alive at the infamous Cecil Hotel in Los Angeles. After she mysteriously disappeared, disturbing footage surfaced of Elisa acting erratically in an elevator, pressing buttons frantically, peering out into the hallway and seemingly talking to someone or something unseen. For weeks, no one knew what had happened to her. But during the search, guests at the hotel began reporting strange issues with the water. It ran black, tasted foul, and smelled rotten. Finally, on February 19th, Elisa's decomposing body was discovered inside one of the hotel's rooftop water tanks, the same water that guests had unknowingly been drinking and bathing in. The tanks were secured and only accessible by alarmed doors, leaving many to wonder, how did she end up there? And why? Her death was ruled an accident, but the questions surrounding her final hours and the eerie nature of the hotel's dark history, including ties to serial killers and tragic deaths, make her story one of the most enduring and terrifying mysteries in recent memory. Sometimes, the scariest part of a story is what we'll never fully understand.